Greetings gamers, today we're going to be revisiting our concrete barriers tutorial. It's been about a year since we first released the concrete barriers tutorial, which has gone on to be one of the most successful videos on this channel. But one of the most common comments on that video is that the process is kind of fiddly and people don't think that you'd be able to build a huge number of barriers using that process because it would be too time consuming. So I decided to use the tools and techniques that I've learned over the last year to create a version of this barrier that you can really mass produce. So let's head over to the bench and get started. I began by ripping down some 6 and 10mm XPS foam to the desired widths, making sure to either use factory cut edges or edges I'd squared off to get more precise cuts. I then cut my pieces into their final lengths. With the base pieces cut, I measured the centre line of the jersey barrier and the width of the wall section exactly as I did in the previous video. I then took this back over to my hot wire table and angled the wire to match the marks I had made. I then ran this piece through the hot wire cutter to bevel the base. Once this was done for both sides of the base, I used a small line of hot glue to stick the wall section of the jersey barrier in place. I followed the exact same process for the Alaska barrier, marking where the bevels would be, cutting them out on my table, and gluing the pieces together. Something I didn't consider until the pieces were painted was that the surface texture of the foam would be different where those cuts had been made. The hot wire cutter melts the foam as it passes over, so it leaves a very different texture behind that doesn't pick up on dry brushing as well. I'd recommend that once the barrier is assembled, you go over it lightly with some sandpaper just to bring back that rough texture for painting. Before I started painting the pieces, I added some cracks and battle damage by lightly scoring the surface with an X-Acto knife and then using a pen to deepen the grooves. For bullet holes, I pressed the nib of the pen into the foam and used the X-Acto blade to rough the edges. For painting, I placed a couple of matte pins in the bottom of the barrier to use as a handle, and then gave the whole thing a coat of Mod Podge mixed with some black paint. This helps to firm up the foam and provide additional protection going forward. I wanted to try a more realistic concrete colour scheme for these barriers, so I got a recipe from my buddy Steve, the Goldfish of Justice. He does really awesome work, and I'll leave a link to his website in the card and the description. I began by giving the barriers a base coat of Citadel's Deneb Stone. Rakarth Flesh would work here, but it's a slightly darker tone, so I would add some white or light cream just to brighten it back up. I applied 2 coats of this base colour to make sure I had a nice even coverage. Next, I mixed some Deneb Stone with some Citadel Eshin Grey and really watered this down. Once I had it to a consistency that I liked, I mixed some Lamia Medium in it just to make sure that it covered properly. I liberally washed this into all the cracks and crevices of the model, wiping away any excess with my finger. I made sure to wipe the excess in a downwards motion so that any leftover colour would look like water streaks. After applying the wash into the crack, I used a small brush to stipple that colour all over the model. This helps to create the varied colour of the concrete. Once the stippling was dry, I came back in with some thin Eshin Grey and washed it into the cracks to create even more contrast. Next, I dry brushed the entire surface of the barrier with Deneb Stone and then followed that with some Citadel's Ulthuan Grey. Once the dry brushing was complete, I applied the final touches. I took a rust and an earth pigment powder and mixed them with a little Lamia Medium to create a rusty, dirty wash. I applied this to all the cracks and crevices, making sure to wipe any excess off with my finger in the same downwards motion as before. And as you can see, the end result is far more realistic looking than just the 3-tone grey scheme. As I mentioned earlier, the texture of the foam where it's been cut on the hot wire table is quite pronounced in areas, so I do recommend you lightly sanding the barriers before painting. The hot wire table really makes building these barriers much easier. If you work slowly and methodically by setting up all your cuts in the correct order and doing all of one type of cut at one time, you can put together dozens of these barriers in almost no time at all. Next week, I'm going to be showing you how to cast a more realistic concrete texture for these barriers, and I'm also going to be experimenting with several different styles of concrete painting techniques to choose which is my favourite. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button, and if you'd like to see me revisit some more of our older projects, and update them with all the tools and techniques that I've learned in the last year. Comment down below on which video you'd like to see. So until then, happy gaming. Thanks for watching. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button down below for new content every single Friday. And if you want to keep watching, well, there's another couple videos for you to watch just over there. Happy gaming.